what I would like to say and discuss with you and with Dimitri in particular is what are the main challenges for the peoples lato sensu in the circumstances today at the present stage of global capitalism. I don't want to be academic. I want to be political. And I keep in mind that that might be and should be, I hope, listened by Chinese people, because I'll try to draw some conclusions about what is the challenge for China in particular and for the Chinese people. Now, I think we ought to, from the start, to distinguish two things: the crisis within capitalism from the crisis of capitalism. Now, crisis within capitalism, we had many crises of that kind throughout the 19th century in particular, but the present crisis, which, and I will say something about it, started mid-70s of last century, 50 years ago, and is continuing with ups and downs, but is continuing. It's not an economic crisis, it's a systemic crisis of capitalism, which means that we have reached a point where capitalism has moved from growing positively, expanding, deepening, with many negative aspects for many people, but also some historical positive aspects, into a period of that I dare call senile capitalism, that is declining. Declining doesn't mean neither that it will die by itself. We have just to wait until it dies. So I was saying it's a crisis of capitalism, of senile capitalism, which, as I said, one, doesn't mean that capitalism is going to die slowly by itself and quietly. It doesn't mean also that there are not features which appear to be brilliant, such as new technologies, such as high growth here and there, such as I don't know what. No. Capitalism has been meeting by its nature, and that was, I think, what Marx alone understood. Nobody else understood that, which is the most fundamental. That it is a system which is not viable, because it is based on an internal contradiction beyond class struggle, which is commonplace, by the fact that the conditions for its smooth reproduction and expansion is in contradiction with the basic pressure on wages, the price of labor, so that there is a tendency of capital profits to be always too high and cannot be reinvested for the expansion of the system. Capitalism has been able to overcome continuously that contradiction during a century, maybe a century and a half. Let's say from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, end of the 18th century, to the Second World War, grosso modo. By expanding internally, by absorbing pre-capitalist systems, and externally by conquering the peripheries and constructing a periphery which could provide an answer to this contradiction. But it has reached now, this is my view, it is not shared by many people. But I have not seen, nowhere at least, any convincing argument against it. There is rhetoric against it. And precisely this rhetoric is that we have a beautiful new technologies and so on and so forth, which is not the problem. Is the following, that in a very short period, at the beginning of this crisis of capitalism, which started with the US dollar delinked from gold, 1971, and then 1973, the rate of exchange on the market system for the financial flows and monetary systems. In a period of 3-4 years, not more, even less, 2 or 3 years, the average rate of growth for the triad, US, Europe, and Japan, went down to half of what it has been on the average for the 30 years before, from after World War II to 75, 45, 75. And they have never recovered since, never. They remained half on the average, and the trend is to be less and less. Well, some people say that means that capitalism is sick in the old West, United States, Europe, and Japan, but is growing elsewhere, particularly in China, but also India, Brazil, and other countries with high rates of growth, and therefore that it's only that the center of gravity of capitalism is perhaps moving to other places. I think this is nonsense, because the other parts where it is apparently growing remain subjugated to the centers. They remain peripheries. Now, what has happened with this long crisis was that what was the response of capital to the challenge? The response was 3 strategies. One, deepening the strength, reinforcing the strength of monopoly capital. That is, monopoly capital is not something new. It had already 80 years of age, at least. But now monopoly capital has reached a point which I think must be qualified, a new stage. I have called it generalized monopoly capital. Why generalized? We can call it late monopoly capital, post-monopoly capital, I don't know what, but these are semantic. What is the content? Is that monopoly capital now, at that stage, has been able for the first time to control everything. That is all, or almost all, the forms of production which are not directly owned and managed by monopoly capital are submitted to the status of quasi-subcontractors. Meaning that they are controlled, overflow, by those who provide the inputs, the credit, and so on, and downstream, overstream, and downstream by those who control the markets and so on. Now, the example of agriculture is typical of that in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere. But that is one. But that monopoly is not only, it I stress, it is a monopoly, a strengthened monopoly of control, not necessarily of property. Property is something else. For instance, the formal property juridically can be millions of people, the shareholders, but it's meaningless. The decision is in the hand of a handful of those who control the decision. That is one. But also because of their overall control and exclusive control, I would say. Previously, they were compelled by the political, social balances within the various countries to make compromise with other segments of the bourgeoisie, with the petty entrepreneurs, with the I don't know what, with these ones, including with some, with the working class in some cases. Now they are not. They are not. So that is the abolition. It gives them a total power, which means the end of the formal bourgeois democracy. Left and right had a meaning. Left meant conservative, right meant reformist, but real reforms. Now it's meaningless. Socialists have become social liberals. There is a consensus that nothing can be done against the so-called market. What is meant by market is the control of monopoly capital over the market. It's not the market by itself. And the blah blah in China about the virtues of the market do not take into account the reality. What market are we speaking of? Now, third aspect of the domination over the medias. The medias have become what I'm calling a clergy in the service of monopoly capital. They all repeat the same thing, and they all say the same. On any question, whether they take their orders and they just repeat the thing that must be said. And the fourth aspect is the pseudo-cultural or pseudo-culture, the formatting of the people to think that they are free individuals when they are in fact depoliticized. They are no more citizens and working people. They are consumers and spectators of the TV. So that's, again, maximal alienation. The present system is close to what is totalitarian regime. Much more than what was said about the Soviet Union, for instance, or China of Mao, or even if it were it was very different, Hitler and the fascists. Totalitarian. But it is a soft totalitarianism, which means that it doesn't request for the people to support them positively by demonstrating, but just to accept. Soft. But this soft, if you resist, it can become hard, and it can become criminal against you, criminalize the opposition and the resistance. Now, this is point one, the response of capital to that. New age of monopoly capital. And I call it declining monopoly capital. Because capitalism was able to manage the system by other means, by the means of the bourgeois democracy, by the means of historical compromises with a variety of classes, by the means at the international level also of compromise, sometimes wars also, but also compromises, division, partition of the world. You have an influence there, we have an influence there, you have colonies there, we have colonies elsewhere, and accept one another. Now they cannot. So the second feature, which is new also, in my opinion, is what I'm calling the collective imperialism of the triad. That is, the centers of historical imperialism, which were first the major countries of Europe and United States, a little later Japan, the triad, plus their external provinces, as I say, Australia, Canada, have become fundamental allies. That is, it doesn't mean that there is no conflict among them on interests here and there in a region or in somewhere. But it means that they have understood that they cannot manage the world because they represent 15% of the world population. They cannot manage the rest of the world, which includes China and Russia, but also all Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, without being in solidarity, having the same. And they accept the leadership of the US, because the US is the military master. It has almost alone the means of interfering, destroying, without being limited by its internal opinion even. There is no opinion in the US. The US can decide to bomb here and there. Nobody will protest in the US. Oh, some people, individuals, some groups, but not the society. So that is collective. Imperialism until the Second World War was to be conjugated in plural. There was not imperialism. There was British imperialism, American imperialism, French imperialism, German imperialism, Japanese imperialism, also in conflict among themselves and leading even to big wars. Now we can speak of imperialism, not the empire, but imperialism, but collective imperialism. Now, that is the second feature of the stage where we are. Now, that system is not viable. Not viable precisely because what it offers to 85% of the world population is miserable. Perhaps not in the case of China, because it happens to have been associated with two brilliant success of China, one the Maoist period, and second the post-Maoist period, and modernization of China very fast, and with a very big country, not a small one. It's not Taiwan, because the miracle of Taiwan can be explained by the strategy of the US to have it, to face China, but not the miracle of China. That is the result of the struggles and the political choices of the Chinese, the ruling classes and the people, and in their contradictions, but also in their common moving up. Now, therefore, facing that, there is not only the danger, but we see it already, that the collective imperialism has understood that it cannot manage the world except by the use of more and more violence. This is one, in my opinion, of the symptoms of a decline of a system. A system which is not declining does not need to more and more violence. It can be violent here and there, but not need systematic and systematically more and more violence. This is why a declining system is not a system which is going to die by itself. Either you kill it or it kills you. And again, I go back to Marx. Marx said that the struggle, we can say the class struggle, but also the class struggle lato sensu, which becomes the political struggle, which includes internal struggles of classes, but external struggles of so-called nations, in the geopolitical sense. These struggles have reached the point where either revolution, even if the word is pompous with a capital R, and I will say something about that, that is an attempt to be lucid that the system is senile, that its senility is very dangerous, that senility means more and more violence, not peace and democracy, plus welfare perhaps, or plus growth of GDP with inequalities, or perhaps with reducing a little the inequalities. No, it means exactly the opposite. Growing inequalities within the societies, between the societies, more and more plunder, including the so-called ecological plunder, that is capitalism. This capitalism is not able to deal with the questions of how to limit the not only the waste, the small waste, but the destruction of the reproduction of life, and perhaps the earth even, and so on. So we have to understand that. This is my analysis of the present crisis of the system. Therefore, I will say two things. Therefore in general, and therefore for China in particular. Therefore in general, either there is a lot of resistance to that, local resistance, I would say, which are not united, which are many émiettés, how do you say in English, many resistance on specific problems, which means, which is growing. You can see it even by the social resistance in France today to more direct rule by financial monopoly capital in the frame of the collective imperialism and so on. You can see it everywhere. You could see it even by the explosions, like the explosions in Arab countries. You can see it by within Europe itself, by Greece, the Tsipras affair, and you can see it everywhere. But without lucidity, that is what I mean by lucidity. Those people who are struggling, these are mostly legitimate struggles. I'm not questioning it. I mean, when women struggle for equality of rights, equality of salaries, for instance, it's legitimate. But they don't relate their problem to the globe, to this systemic crisis of capitalism. And so on for the others, for everybody. Which means that those struggles, at the present stage, fragmented, they are on the defensive, which means that the initiative is left in the hands of the ruling class of monopoly capital, and it's a response to that. They don't have a counter project, communism, a higher stage of human civilization, made possible at the present level of development of productive forces. But they don't have it. Now, what is needed is precisely to move from a defensive strategy of fragmented movements to an offensive strategy of relatively united movement, which means many things. It means, one, internationalism, and that is fundamental. It means, two, the capacity within each nation, to take the Maoist expression, to manage the contradiction within the people. Not everybody, even of the people, the working people, have in the short run the same interests. But managing that. And for that, to be lucid, we need an organization, or we need organizations at all levels, from the national level, because politics is still going to be run for a long time within societies which are called nations, whether they are plurinational, single nation, these are other problems. And at the international level, that organization has a name, the International. Now, the International here, I would say two things about it. One, it cannot be a remake of neither the second nor the third International, which were based on the idea one country, one party, or what Lenin said, one class, one party, and all the other organizations are transmission belts of that one party, the good one. Whether a reformist one, like the Second International was, a European and reformist, imperialist Europe and reformist, or anti-capitalist and more global, including Chinese, Iranians, Arabs, Latin Americans, Africans, Indians in the international, but one party. No, it cannot be that. It should be, it's more difficult. Oh, the challenge is how to unite with respect of diversity. That is to have many organizations, different organizations, and not only so-called political parties, but also trade unions, also popular associations in struggle, provided, of course, one, that they understand and accept that what unites us is more important than what divides us. Second, that they keep their independence of thinking, and that we are not going to have a trial on their ideologies. Are you Marxist or not Marxist? Are you, this or that? They can keep their historical roots and so on, and references if they wish, but provided that they are in struggle. Not they accept to be manipulated by monopoly capital as instruments for them. Now, that is what we need. We are very far from that. Even the idea is not considered, neither within any country or almost, nor at the international level, at the global level. They believe, and you have examples of that, they believe that each one should be completely independent and conduct his struggles, and that they are often even in disagreement, deep disagreement with the neighbor, which is also struggling, etc., for one or another reason. Questions of short-run interest, or questions of ideologies or pseudo-ideologies or historical reference or anything else. Now, this is why, at best, if we have that, this is a degree of what I'm calling just lucidity. Try to have more lucidity, understanding of what is the real enemy and what are should be allies. And what is the target, and stressing on immediate or short-run strategic advances. This is what I'm calling, rather than revolution, we have been used to call it revolution, not since the Marxist and the communist movement, but even before, from the French Revolution. That comes from there. I would prefer to understand it as revolutionary advances, which means that they are not good. They prepare possible, but only possible, later other revolutionary advances. And they compel the enemy to be on the defensive and to withdraw and to become, therefore, a little less aggressive because they are forced to be so. That is the best thing. The other way of change, historical change, is through decadence, which means that there would be no lucidity